And then what we see a lot in kids is normal everyday behavior. And I always joke with my colleagues, right? Like my kid, when he was 2, loved to line up his cars, and he'd do it in color order or size order, right? And we have to look at what's normal toddler behavior or what's normal behavior of any kid or even any adult, and what is OCD.
Welcome to Peds Doc Talk TV and this episode of the Peds Doc Talk podcast, where you can catch my amazing conversations with guests on the show here on my YouTube channel, or if you prefer audio only, wherever you access podcasts. I'm Dr. Mona Amin, a board-certified pediatrician, lactation consultant, and mom of 2, and I'm here to uplift, support, and guide you so you can raise those incredible kids. Let's get to today's amazing conversation. Welcome back to the show. Today I have Michelle Massi, who is an LMFT and a mom, who's a therapist specializing in working with kids, families, and adults who struggle with anxiety, OCD, and OC-related disorders. And she's joining me to talk all about understanding OCD in young children, signs, support, and common misconceptions. Thank you so much for joining me today, Michelle.
Thank you for having me.
And we are doing this as a round 2. So let's be honest about tech issues with podcasts. We had recorded an amazing episode and then it did not save. And so I had to have Michelle come on. So I'm going to get to learn about OCD for a second time from her. So thank you again for taking the time, round 2, to join me today.
My pleasure. I'm glad you could have me back and this worked out.
Yeah. And so tell us a bit more about yourself and the work that you do for anyone who may not be familiar with who you are and what OCD might be.
Great. Thank you. So my name is Michelle Massi. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I practice in Los Angeles, California, although I'm licensed also in Texas, Georgia, Arizona. I think that's it. And I do some therapy in virtually in Florida too.
Nice.
And I specialize, I run a group practice. I specialize in treating anxiety disorders, OCD, OCD-related disorders, which includes tics, body focus, repetitive behaviors, all the anxiety disorders like social anxiety, which we see a lot in kids, generalized anxiety, etc. I am also a faculty member at the International OCD Foundation. So that means I just teach other clinicians how to do the work I do.
Amazing. And I am so excited that we could connect. Fun fact, I've actually met Michelle in person at one of my PDT social events. So she came to that event in LA and I loved connecting with her. And then she told me about the work that she does. And, you're doing a lot of work trying to educate other clinicians obviously about this, but as pediatricians, we are not OCD experts. I can only speak for myself. I'm not an OCD expert. I rely on my therapists in my community who are experts in this niche to be the ones that I would refer my patients to if I'm concerned. So like we've always talked about on the show, it's a team effort to get children the support that they need. And the reason why I really wanted you to come on the show is that I get a lot of parents in my community who have children who are younger, let's say under 5, who are unsure if certain behaviors that their child are doing are typical for their age or if it's OCD, these 3-4-year-olds that are doing certain behaviors. So can you discuss more about the signs of OCD and the typical age we can begin to make that official diagnosis?
Sure. So OCD is comprised of or made up of obsessions and compulsions, meaning that a person has intrusive thoughts or images or words that get stuck in their head. It brings them anxiety or distress, right? We always think of like, I'm so obsessed with Taylor Swift. That's not the same as an obsession, right? As like, we're excited about it. I always joke with my clients about, when I was a kid and I would write in my notebook, like, I love so-and-so or Mrs., when I was 14 and like Mrs. whatever. That's different than, we call it an obsessed, but that's different. That does not bring about the distress that obsessions cause my patients. And then we have compulsions, which are behaviors, whether they're mental, like counting or repeating a phrase in your head, or physical, like hand washing, checking the door locks, moving things around, right? Seeking reassurance. Those are done to decrease the distress or anxiety related, or to prevent the bad thing from happening, right? Like if I have this thought of, oh my God, what if the plane crashes? And if I hop up and down one time, the plane won't crash, there's a connection there. So again, when I'm writing like Mr. blah, 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 or I love Taylor Swift, I'm not saying it to prevent something bad from happening to Taylor, right? Like I'm doing it because I just genuinely love her music. And so that's the difference between like what's sort of like normal obsessions and OCD. And then what we see a lot in kids is normal everyday behavior. And I always joke with my colleagues, right? Like my kid, when he was 2, loved to line up his cars, and he'd do it in color order or size order, right? And we have to look at what's normal toddler behavior or what's normal behavior of any kid or even any adult, and what is OCD, right? If I go to the bathroom and wash my hands, I don't necessarily have OCD, even though it could be a symptom of OCD. But if I'm washing my hands like up to my elbows or, past my wrist for some reason, or in a, pre-COVID, right? COVID has a whole new, like since COVID, we've like developed all these new things. But, if I touch the sink and I have to start again, now we're looking at a behavior that's interfering with functioning, which is different than my son lining up his cars, right? Now, my son is, I think, about 6 weeks or 2 months younger than Ryan, than your son. And I don't know if your son does this, but he has all of his friends that sleep with him. And there's like now 30 probably friends in his bed. And they have a very specific, it maybe takes like 2 minutes to set them up at night, but there's a very specific place they go, right? Now, I could look at that. Is that a symptom of OCD? It could be, because it could be a symptom of like behaviors of just right, or needing to have them in a certain way so something bad doesn't happen. Or it could just be normal, like preschool behavior of, I like all my friends where I have my friends, and this is where they each have their spot, right? The special ones are on the right side, the not as special are on the left side.
I am totally relating to this because yes, and it actually started, the lining up of the stuffies happened probably in the last 6 months. So my son is almost 5 in December, and it is so funny, yes, because they have to be. There's like I can visualize it on his bed right now. There's 4 of them in our house in his bed, and they all have their particular order, and they have to be in that order. And I love that you said it perfectly. The behavior is interfering with function, meaning it's a small thing. It's not like he wakes up in the middle of the night and is like, "Mommy, my stuffies aren't there," or like he's panicked, or that he comes home from school and he's worried about his stuffies like being where they're supposed to be. Like he's still able to function, even though in that moment he wants it where he wants it. Is that kind of like the understanding for how we would differentiate typical toddler preschooler behavior to actually being a condition like OCD?
Yeah. And I also want to watch kind of where it goes, right? Like, are we still doing this at 10 years old, right? Or not that 10-year-olds can't sleep with stuffies. I definitely did. But, how is this behavior manifesting over time? How much time are we spending an hour setting them up a certain way? Or if one slightly falls, we have to fix it. Is there a meltdown, right? We're looking now, obviously at bedtime, there are sometimes meltdowns just because it's bedtime and we're tired, right? But we're looking kind of at a big picture. I know you've talked about this with a lot of your like feeding stuff with kids, is that we're looking at the big picture, not at each meal, is the child eating enough? But, over the day, over the week, are they consuming enough food, right? And to not worry about each specific. So the same thing happens in this. Is like, are we just having a meltdown one day? Are we just lining things up one day? Or look at the big picture. How much is it interfering in day-to-day functioning? Can I not go on a date with my husband because nobody else knows how to put my kid to bed because he has to line everything up, right? Like, what are the kind of wave patterns of what's going on?
I love it. And this is so important because, like we said, with so many things in child psychology, child development, it is very, very likely that it is just typical child development, and it's not something like OCD. I remember watching a social media video of like there was a camera in like a preschool class, and all the kids were lining up to go to whatever recess or whatever, and there was one child that stayed behind to help the teacher push all the chairs in. So like he wanted to help push the chairs in before
That would
he
be my
got in
child.
line. Yeah, and then what's so funny, Ryan would do the same, and I made the mistake of going into the comment section, and everyone was saying, "Oh, that child probably has OCD. It's not cute. It's actually probably like a something that needs diagnosis." And I said, "You're watching one moment. Like we can't make that assumption. Could it be, like you said, Michelle? Like could it be that this child
Definitely.
has it? Absolutely." And I don't want parents to ever think that, well, then no one's listening to me, that I feel this concern. But we also have to realize that it could just be a helpful, orderly child, but it's not impacting, like we talked about, the function and overall. But I was like, I was going to start commenting, and I was like, no, 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 it's not worth it. But I was like, can we just take this moment as like a kid who was helpful and like gave a high five to the teacher on the way out, and leave it to the teacher and the parents to figure out if this is something that needs to be worked up or diagnosed as something
Right.
more than just helping push in chairs.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And we know that with a lot of developmental conditions that there can be some overlap, right? Like we see, for example, using ADHD, autism, anxiety, that there can be some overlap of these conditions. Is OCD commonly associated with other diagnoses or conditions?
Yes, we often see comorbid, like both diagnoses happening at the same time, a lot with just in general the other anxiety disorders, social anxiety, generalized anxiety disorder, occasionally selective mutism. And then we see it a lot with tics or Tourette's,
Mm.
autism, and ADHD. And the hard part, and actually body focused repetitive behaviors like hair pulling and skin picking. We often, the hard part with some of these diagnoses is that the symptoms overlap, right? Is a
Yeah.
kiddo in school not focusing because they're having obsessions running through their head all day? Or do they have inattentive ADHD, right? And they
Yeah.
can't concentrate. Are they doing a repetitive behavior because of autism or because of OCD or both? Right. So I often, when I'm checking in with parents, but also when I'm teaching other clinicians, we want to look at the functionality, similar to what I was saying in terms of like, is this a diagnosable disorder or normal everyday behavior? In the same way of trying to figure out the different disorders, is what's the functionality of the behavior?
And I'm realizing then that we're describing, obviously there being so much overlap with other conditions as well. When you're kind of deciding about making a diagnosis, are there certain things that you're looking at? I mean, I'm sure there's multiple visits involved. Is there a form that parents fill out? What goes into making that diagnosis and having that official OCD label?
Yeah. So it depends on where you go, right? Some people will go to a clinical psychologist and have a full neuropsych assessment
Hmm.
and get a lot of information. You don't need that to be diagnosed with OCD, but especially if there's autism or ADHD in question, somebody might be sent there and then also be diagnosed with anxiety or OCD. But if a person just comes to my practice to get diagnosed, I'm doing what I call a biopsychosocial, which is exactly what it sounds like. I'm essentially just getting a history of what's going on, what's been going on. How are these behaviors interfering, or how are they functioning in the person's life? What's going on in the home? Who lives in the home? And I do this regardless of age. If I'm working with a kiddo, then I'm interviewing the parents mainly. If I'm working with an older kid or adults, then obviously I'm just chatting in with them and maybe checking in with family members. And then there's something called the Y box, or the Yale Brown Obsessive Compulsive Scale. For children, there's the Psy box, that most therapists who treat OCD will do. Not all, because sometimes I just can rattle these off in my head and I don't necessarily give a formal assessment. But I'm looking for that connection between the obsessions and compulsions. And there's a lot of overlap between like generalized anxiety disorder and OCD, and symptoms are looking the same, and trying to tease apart, again, the functionality, the behaviors that are going on, the compulsions. Is it just reassurance seeking that we often see in generalized anxiety disorder? Like, mommy,
Yeah.
am I going to die in my sleep tonight? Are you sure you're going to pick me up tomorrow from school? Things like that. Or am I looking at a cause effect between the obsession and the compulsion?
Oh, very important. And that's why I say, like, I think especially when it comes to these kind of things, it's so important that if you feel like your pediatrician is not, understanding, I want to really remind you that your pediatrician is your first point. And if they're not supposed to be experts at everything, right? They're supposed to be your home base that can refer you to specialists who specialize in these conditions. And it's so important for me that you get that help, because if you are in your, at home concerned that your child may have OCD or whatever you're concerned about, you should get that support earlier than later, to help you either make that diagnosis, get that child support that would be helpful for them. Which leads me to my next question is, what does that support look like for a child who has OCD? The treatment, the therapy, what can a family envision if they do get that diagnosis?
Yeah, it's funny that you asked this question because I literally sat in a support group last weekend to have, and the talk of the support group was "It takes a village," and it was answering exactly this question. Is it looks a little different for every family member, or in every family, right? But generally speaking, there are specialists who specialize in anxiety and OCD, and I would ultimately tell a parent, like, the best thing you can ever do is find somebody who specializes in OCD, because if you get the wrong treatment, or a treatment that is not the gold standard for OCD or not first line evidence-based treatment, you can end up doing more harm than good. I've had, adult patients who come in after years of the wrong kind of treatment. So making sure that you find an evidence-based therapist, and there's plenty of us out there, and with the new rules about telehealth through like things like SciPac and things like that, it's so much easier to find a therapist that specializes in this. Depending on the age of the child will determine like how much family stuff is going on, right? If I'm working with a 5-year-old, I'm much more likely to do most of my sessions with the parents, and kind of do parent retraining, and less of my sessions with the kid. If the kid is like 10, 11, 14, I'm going to probably do most of my sessions with the kid and then bring the parents in. Then we sometimes get family members where the kiddo doesn't think there's a problem, right? If there's a lot of family accommodation going on, and the kiddo's like, I'm fine with this. I have no problem that my family disrobes in the garage and takes a shower as soon as they get home. It's no big deal to me, right? Yeah. And the family's like, what are you talking about? There is treatment for family members. If your child does not want treatment or isn't willing to, there's specific support for family members that helps change the parents or the loved ones' behavior, and focuses a lot on removing family accommodation. And so by just doing that, then the child's behavior ends up changing. There's groups for parents, there's groups for kids, there's a ton of resources out there. I typically tell people to start with the organization that I am a faculty for, the International OCD Foundation, because they have a ton of resources, not just like questions to ask your therapist, or what medications, if I'm going to take medications, should we be on, but it's also got lists of therapists who specialize in OCD, specialize in the OC related disorders. And that's a great place to start. They've got lists of support groups on there. If for some reason a child or a person would need a higher level of care, they also list things there. So that's where I start. There's a ton of books on OCD. I can't even list them all because half of my friends have written books on OCD. I will leave somebody out and feel horrible, but there's a ton of books for both parents and kids. And so like, that's where I start with, sort of figuring out what the best treatment is. But exposure and response prevention therapy for children with OCD is the best treatment to start with.
And I'll be linking the International OCD Foundation on the show notes. And then you mentioned that it's great to find a therapist that specializes in OCD. Is there a database online that families can look online for, or is it just depend?
So on that, on that website, they have a list of people. I will tell you, I run a Facebook group for therapists that specialize in this. We have over 4,000 members. So there's plenty of therapists. If somebody can't find somebody, I'm happy for them to reach out to me, and I can send resources. I know not every single one of those 4,000, but I know a good deal of them. And there's people all across the country and outside of, I don't know how many international
we do
followers you have, but there are resources. It's less, unfortunately, but there are resources outside of the United States. So I can absolutely help there. But
Absolutely.
International
Amazing.
OCD Foundation is a great place to start.
I love this. And we're debuting this episode in honor of OCD Awareness Week month. I can't remember, but
Week,
week,
yes.
yes. Yes. And part of that for me is even if you may not have OCD or have a child with OCD, the most important thing we can do is squash misconceptions, myths, things like that to be more understanding of those with OCD. So, what are some misconceptions surrounding OCD that you would love for people to know?
Yeah. I think the thing that brings nails on a chalkboard for me is, oh my God, I'm so OCD, right?
Mm,
Or like we see this a lot at stores. Things have gotten better over the years as we've called it out, but obsessive cat disorder or obsessive, whatever disorder, and people are just adding to different C's, and making jokes and making light of it, and if somebody checks something or somebody washes something. The other thing I often will get is someone coming in going, my child has OCD, but they're super messy, right? There's not just
mm,
one type of OCD, because they think of what they see on TV, right? Which is like orderly or, keeping things clean and uncontaminated, but there are so many subtypes of OCD. So knowing that there are a lot of different faces to what OCD looks like, but it all comes down to having an obsession and having a compulsion. So that's the thing that brings everything together. It's just what that obsession is, what the person is afraid of, their core fear may change. And so knowing that, like, when you throw around like, oh my God, I'm so
yeah.
OCD, you're really diminishing, my client who spends 6 hours in the shower because they don't feel like they did a good enough job, or they're still contaminated, or it doesn't feel right. It just really diminishes that feeling to them, right? Like, somebody who can't keep a job or go to school, when we're talking about little kids, it's such a different experience than, like, oh my God, I need, my colors lined up just a certain way, or I like, things a certain way in my purse or whatever it is.
You're right. I think that also just goes in line with a lot of different things. Like people will say, "Oh, my ADD is kicking in," but you don't actually have ADHD or ADD, right? Like you're just kind of distracted. But
Right.
it is very because as someone who's married to someone who actually does have ADHD, I can tell you that his brain works differently than mine, and I don't have ADHD, and so it is a respectful thing. And I really appreciate you saying that because people may say, "Oh, it's just a joke," but that's usually because you don't want to change. But you can
Yeah.
actually change. You don't need to
Yeah.
make jokes like that. It may be a joke to you, but it's not a joke to, like you mentioned, the person who's really struggling with true symptoms. And I think that's such a valid and important point to again just provide more understanding and compassionate to those who actually truly do have OCD and are trying to live meaningful lives and not let it consume them, which can be so hard. I imagine if it's not managed effectively for these children and for these adults.
Right. Right. Exactly.
Oh, thank you so much for this. Is there anything else that you'd like to add about OCD in honor of OCD Awareness Week, or anything that we missed?
So I just want to kind of empower family members, parents, and let them know that this is very treatable. Obviously, you had mentioned, getting treatment as soon as possible. Look, don't feel guilty if you missed it originally.
Yeah.
Oftentimes we'll just be like, oh, my child has a quirk, or they're shy when they actually have social anxiety disorder, etc. But really know that it takes a village. It takes everybody participating in treatment. It takes everybody kind of rally and make changes in the household, right? For the good, not for the family accommodation way. But it is a very treatable disorder. We talk about how there's no cure for OCD because it's a chronic disorder, but I have patients who've gone from, incapable of functioning on their own to holding down jobs, getting married, having their own kids. This is not, where they're going to be stuck living at home forever, unless, of course, you want that to be. But,
Yeah.
it really is something that somebody can live with. That, my client just got married recently, actually a year ago, and when they first came to me, like, or even before that, they were not functioning, and to watch that change in their life, know that can be a possibility for whoever you love in your family, or if it's you with OCD as well.
And do you feel like any of your parents that come in for children who are getting this diagnosis, do you feel like any of them have label phobia? Like they're worried about having the label of OCD for their child, or not really?
I definitely see it more with autism than OCD,
Okay.
I think, because of the just the stigma around,
Yes,
right?
I was
But
going to
in
ask. Yep.
general,
Hmm.
yeah, the stigma around mental health is a big one, right? And we see it a little bit in different cultures. Oftentimes, there's a genetic component to OCD and anxiety disorders, right? So if we see a parent with it, we're likely to see a kid with it, not necessarily. So a lot of times the kids I'm working with, the parents either have an anxiety disorder, OCD, tic disorder. So it's, they're kind of aware already, and they're not so scared. Some of them don't want to label it and call it what it is because they don't want their kid to get labeled at school. And
Mm,
so we've worked around using the term like rituals, and we still address it, but they just, don't necessarily want me to call it OCD. I hesitate around that because obviously the more forthcoming we can be,
yeah.
that oftentimes someone could go, oh, I know, it's like if you have a headache and you're like, what's causing this headache? Am I
Yeah.
dehydrated? Do I have cancer? Did I not sleep well enough? Is it the weather outside? It often helps us to know and like to correlate it to something. So the same thing with these, but I feel like the stigma around OCD isn't quite as bad, and especially, between social media and TV shows that we've had about the treatment of OCD over the years, I think a lot of it, more people are talking about it. And, obviously with the internet blowing up and compared to like when I first started working in this arena. And so I think because there's more information out there, people aren't as kind of tied up in that. I think the harder part is when there's the more taboo subtypes of OCD that people get a little like weirded out. And I have kiddos who have, sexual orientation OCD subtype, which is a fear of like, am I the right sexual orientation? Do I know what my
Mm,
sexual orientation? Can I be certain? Did I harm somebody in an inappropriate way? Right. And so with some of the more taboo ones, I think there might be more stigma around that, even in the younger age. But we're slowly starting to move away from that fear of the labeling.
Well, I'm so happy to hear that, and I hope that episodes like these and conversations like these will really help break that stigma that may be there for some families. And like you said, I do agree that it does exist more for autism because of the misinformation around autism and the stigma around autism, which still exists. And I mean, I'm online every day and I'm like, can we stop with this causes autism and this causes autism? It's like it exists so much, and I can understand why a family would feel like that. But to your point, having the diagnoses, or if you want to say the label, is so helpful so that we can get the help and the resources and know that this is what it is. Let's talk about, terminology that may help that child in the school setting, like you mentioned, using the term rituals. And my biggest dream for my platform is to be able to educate parents who may not have children who are autistic, OCD, ADHD, but how to raise their children to accept other children who are neurodiverse, who think differently, who look differently. And that is why this conversation was so important to me, because even if I may not have an OCD child, who knows, I may, he's still 5, but
Right, right.
even if I don't, the least I can do is teach some compassion and some understanding that some of his friends at school may have rituals that they're very into. And we don't make fun of that. We support them and we're kind, and we can make a world a better place by that. So thank you so much, Michelle. Is there any other final uplifting message that you would like to share with our listeners? And this is for, I'm all about uplifting messages and keeping everyone feeling all loosey goosey and happy. Is there anything else that you would want to add for all of our listeners today in regards to, a take home?
Yeah. One thing that just popped in my head is that 1 in 50 people has OCD. So it's likely that somebody else in your child's class also, or grade at their school, also
Yeah.
has OCD. They are not alone, and you are not alone. Like I said, there's a village out there of help and support. If you open up and we start talking about things, you'll learn more and more. I know you've talked about your fertility journey, for example, online. And I think the more we talk about these things, the more we can see that there's a village out there and we aren't alone. And I think we flourish when we have our village to support us. So just lean onto the village you have. And if you don't have one, find one, because there are plenty of other parents in your situation.
I love this message. What a great final uplifting message. Thank you. We cannot do this alone in every situation in parenting. And where can people go to stay connected? So I know you gave the International OCD Foundation, but if they wanted to learn more about your practice or your
Yeah.
information as well, where can they go to find you?
Yes. So on Instagram, I'm Anxiety Therapy LA, although I'm not great about posting, but I will post for OCD Week. And then my website is anxietytherapyla.com. And
What?
I can be found
Yeah.
both places.
Wonderful. And I'm going to be linking those resources and the Instagram handle and the website, and then also the International OCD Foundation resource as well for all of you. And thanks again, Michelle, for coming back. Round 2 was even better, I would say, than round 1. Yes. And I'm just so grateful that you
Practice
could
makes
join
perfect,
me.
right?
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Thank you, Michelle, for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for tuning in. If you loved this conversation, make sure to hit that thumbs up sign, share this episode on your social media channels, and subscribe to this channel to stay up to date on all future episodes and our weekly educational videos. Have questions or comments? Make sure to comment below, and I'll see you all next time. Stay well, stay loved, and keep on shining.